set of assumptions. When you look at scenario planning or sensitivity analysis, that it's otherwise also called, there are a lot of other variables and it is a lot more dynamic. How is it so? Because we put in different assumptions on your cash inflows and cash outflows, projecting them in different manners, it gives you a more dynamic view and lets you play around with different possibilities. So obviously the next natural question is, how many such scenarios should you be running? Well, ideally there should be 3 scenarios, and you might have heard this again and again before. You have a base case scenario, which is, assuming everything goes as per plan. You have an optimistic scenario, which talks about how things will be better than what you expect them to be, and a pessimistic scenario, which is probably the worst case. It is possible that because we are in an emergency, these 3 might not cut it. You might have more than these scenarios. Forget the terminologies, think of as many ideas and possibilities that are possible, and that will help you arrive at different simulations to be able to pick from one. At the same time, don't complicate it, keep it simple. Imagine this exercise to be a range of possibilities. Choose a combination of possibilities, both on the income as well as the expense side, that reflect what is best for your organization. The objective of this exercise is to help you make decisions and not complicate them. Some of the things to keep in mind while sort of running a scenario planning is that keep in mind the most important things to consider. Things that significantly impact your operations. Could be that beneficiaries are not accessible due to the nature of programs being field intensive. Or it could be that the population size that you work with are the most vulnerable. Could be people above 60, people below 10. It could also be that you do a lot of training which is physical and one-on-one, and it's not possible to do that right now or till a foreseeable future, which is uncertain right now. It is possible you are highly volunteer driven, and it's not possible to get volunteers right now. How does all of this affect you as an organization? Whether it increases your costs, are there methods that help you in saving costs? Similarly, think about income scenarios. Are you dependent on an event or a particular fundraising strategy? Are your biggest contributors also affected, and so they will stop giving you money? These are all factors that will help you do a scenario planning and provide a degree of variance when you're making projections. Remember that savings should not be at the cost of team morale, team bandwidth, program needs. It should also be feasible to do and should be able to meet funder commitments. I know all of these things make it even more difficult to steer, and hence we need to conduct regular monitoring to ensure that we are sticking to the plan. Use all of these outputs and indications in your planning exercise to make real decisions. The only thing I would want to say here is to be confident and move ahead. Use this as a blueprint to move forward. While planning and all other means are being performed, some immediate steps that an organization can administer right away on different fronts and foots are income enhancement measures, cost saving measures, other measures, which are different from, maybe not monetary, but otherwise. And how do you future-proof or be prepared for things like this in the future? Let's start immediately with income enhancement. Some examples to help you understand what you can do immediately are, look at conducting targeted COVID-19 related campaigns. You will see a lot of people have pivoted their programs and their fundraising strategies to how their beneficiaries are being affected by the scenario. That might help you be able to get more funds immediately. Diversify the income sources that you have. Maybe look at subletting your premises for a short term. Look at training workshops, obviously probably in nature and not physical maybe. Look at other permitted revenue generating activities which you could conduct within the means of your MOA and your deed that is already in place. Review and sell any redundant assets. Keep in mind that once you do sell them, the cost of reacquiring them after this whole crisis is over might be too much. So you need to conduct those pros and cons analysis for that. Optimize your investment returns. What we mean by that is look at which banks are offering higher rates, review the periods that you are investing for, break your investments into smaller bite sizes and practical sizes, which might not hurt you adversely if you do end up breaking them preemptively. Look at access to public sector grants. Not a lot of NGOs work with public sector, but it's possible that in times like these, it is a good alternative or a source that will definitely continue to give. Organizations in the sports, cultural, and arts section could probably review their membership fees and see how much more or how they can end up benefiting from that. Let's look at cost saving measures now. And to begin with, let's look at some program side cost savings that can happen immediately. Renegotiate terms of grants and MOUs, which sort of force you to work on a reimbursement mode. At this stage, fronting any costs might hurt you. If required, delay or probably even stop these projects. Consider reducing the program scale. I know this is very easy to say and very difficult to do, but remember that a step back now will help you leap forward, much forward and faster in the future once things slow down. If you are worried about staff time and utilization, repurpose your staff to catch up on backlogs, finish all the paperwork, catch up on technology backlogs if you're implementing anything new. Maybe look at internal trainings, keep them engaged, maybe add new skills to them. This is how you could reduce program scale at the same time, still keep your staff engaged. If you are a grant-making organization or working collaboratively on implementing projects, maybe cut back on or temporarily reduce the amounts of grants that you're giving. You may alternatively also repurpose the money that you're giving to the sub-grantees, probably to fund costs that they need immediately to survive, and then maybe convert it into something else. The next option you could see is probably convert or save on trainings by making them e-trainings. Imagine what it would cost to conduct this 2-day conference if this was to be done physically. The venue, the travel, logistics, food, setup, traveling months in advance to make sure all of this happens on 2 days. Versus how it is happening right now. Imagine all the cost that is saved in just being able to do this. Props to Atma and the rest of the panel to be able to do this in such a short span of time. Reduce any essential travel that is not necessary. It will immediately help you repurpose money from here towards your survival. On the human resource front, and I know we yesterday had the good people from Arthan talk about a lot of this, and this is a constant conversation. All of you must have heard this again and again, but some ideas are maybe shelve major hires for some time now. Look at intensively engaging volunteers to work remotely for you, to pick up tasks that otherwise require a lot of other people to do. Especially at this time where a lot of people are at home and cannot do much for their work, may be able to do a lot more for you remotely than you think. Probably delay bonuses and increments. Look at sharing your staff with other organizations temporarily for a few months, as you will see. It may help you earn some money or like at best cut down cost on sharing those resources. In extreme cases, obviously look at salary cuts, but again, starting at the higher management level and then going downwards. And in super extreme cases, maybe letting go of stuff. Coming down to some other measures, obviously, one-time annual events, capital expenditures, all of these can be pushed a little. Stop non-essential expenditure immediately. Review any redundancies on marketing expenses or administration or any of these. Reducing administrative costs on stationery, printing, mobile. This is what usually large organizations do. And you will find that even these small bits go towards adding a lot. Let go of program spaces or offices, if they are and adding up a lot. Maybe even approach the landlords for rent waivers. And I know a lot of organizations we work with are doing this. One of the other measures, which is not related to income or cost savings bit, but is something that not a lot of people can think of, is dipping into your corpus funds. If this corpus has been accepted with a specific direction, is in compliance with the IT Act, the next step for you to do is look at your trust deed and see if the trustees expressively restrict you from using this. If they don't, go ahead, pass a board resolution to see how you can, how much of your corpus you need to dip into. Make sure that if it's possible, dip into corpus which is more than 7 years older, as it will help you avoid any litigation from the income tax perspective. Again, one other good step to add is maybe if you can trace the old donors, go back and ask them for permission to use their money, which is from corpus to other things, because again, it is their wish which will help you move this or repurpose this. Restrict the use of corpus towards expenses which are necessary only for your survival. That means avoid at all cost using this towards program expenses, because the nature of corpus funds is to make sure that you use this for the survival of the organization. Another method which is not very common in the sector is raising loans. How you can help, or how this can help you really bridge short-term gaps, is look at if your trust deed allows you to borrow money from within the organization, outside of financial institutions. Ensure all your statutory compliances are met when it comes to the State Charity Act that you're under, or the Companies Act. Remember that loans should only be raised to address short-term crunches and not long-term crunches. When I say short-term crunches is when you have clarity on when the next tranche of money or the big chunk of money is coming in, and you have surety on how you're going to use those sources of funds to be able to pay this loan back. Again, the use of the loan should be towards fixed and recurring expenses only, and not towards program and variable expenses. This will ensure that you survive the span of time which is the most difficult without having to spend on programs. In case you must be wondering that, oh, we don't have any collaterals to give, how do we raise loans? Look at your network closely for guarantors. A lot of big organizations do this, where you have a lot of influential people on the board who are willing to give guarantees for loans that are raised. Other measures that nonprofits might look at are probably forming consortiums and pitching for projects, merging with other charities in cases where survival is at stake. You can delay your payment cycles, pay once in a month. This will ensure you have cash for a longer time and be able to invest it for more. Draw down on your reserves in your balance sheets. Decide about what is the optimum mix of permanent and contractual employees versus volunteers. Take this time to reconnect with funders, communicate with them, understand and make them understand what your situation is. It will help both of you empathize and understand and get feedback. Grants which are due to come in later, ask your funders if they can push them to coming in a lot earlier. Redirect funding from restricted to unrestricted sources. Ask your grantors, they might be able to help you with that. NGOs who are working on the front lines, they have access to a lot of global and local funding under FCRA. It's possible, there are a lot of organizations who open this door. Look for these opportunities. CSR has, the Ministry of Corporate Affairs has announced that funds spent by companies in prevention or in management of COVID will fall under the CSR obligations. This is one method you can use to pitch for this. Tap into government-sponsored schemes such as NGO Darpan and other platforms to advertise your programs. India has set aside the decision of not accepting foreign aid in case of calamities and disasters and will now accept contributions from abroad to the Prime Minister's PM Cares Fund to combat COVID-19 pandemic. I will let Suhel take over this part of the presentation again.
Thank you for running through those bits, Ravi, and I'm sure a lot of your practical examples would have helped the community with suggestions. And in the interest of time, I think the last two or three bits that I wanted to take up is what now the future holds for us. We're all in uncertain times. We're all not sure how and how much money or grants we're likely to get. So anything which you already have in your kitty is something that you need to keep aside. You need to make sure that you're creating an emergency fund, which would basically ensure that you have sufficient amount of money to tide over these difficult times to make sure that your regular operations are continuing. For these emergency funds, you'll have to make sure that you are including this as part of your upcoming donor pitches as well as your MOUs. You do have to make sure you are being absolutely ruthless in terms of how you're spending your money. Any money saved will help you tide over uncertain times of the future. Any excess income and anything that you can save, it's but obvious that you must set it aside. If you are creating a designated emergency fund, make sure you are taking internal regulatory and board approvals. Any monies which are being invested in long-term deposits, make sure that you're doing these in approved instruments as per the income tax guidelines. And tapping into the emergency fund should literally mean that it's a question of survival of the NGO rather than for any other situation which might allow for you to go into this fund. Tapping, make sure you are doing this extremely cautiously and judiciously to allow you to continue your operations. In terms of basically as a crisis management policy, and again, unfortunately, we do not have time to go ahead and design a policy, but some of the guiding principles that you all must be aware of while creating such a policy is that what is something which will allow for a faster decision to be taken. At the end of the day, any policy which does not permit or does not enable you to take a decision rapidly is not the right policy. You need to be prepared and ensure that you have different scenarios which are called out wherever there is an exceptions which is required to a procurement, any exceptions which might be required from an approval matrix point of view, whether let's just to take an example that any spending of money greater than 50,000 does require approval from the board. The roles and responsibilities need to be clearly called out. It's even more imperative that your action and recovery plans have been very well thought of. You need to make sure that the structure which has been created does give you that flexibility and ensure that it is rigid enough to last you through these crises. And kind of trying to put a positive spin off while we're ending. Obviously, these are only some of the larger grants that have been made by the corporates in India. This is only clearly the beginning. We must go out into the ecosystem and ensure that we're making enough efforts to raise more monies and participate in different programs which are either directly under the aegis of any of these corporate entities, or for that matter, the government sponsored programs, which will be coming through, and be aware of different notifications and different guidelines which keep coming from the government from time to time. And I think that's pretty much what we wanted to do from our end. So back to the Atma team for any closing questions or any bits that we can try and address in the next few minutes.
Thank you so much, Ravi and Suhel. We are right now opening to take the questions regarding this topic. Please type your questions in the chat box that you see on your screens. Please keep the questions clear and precise. Don't use abbreviations or jargons in the question. In the interest of time, we will be selecting limited questions only. And if your questions have remained unanswered by the end of the Q&A section, please note them down and do send it to us through the feedback forms that will be circulated post the conference. Our speakers and us, we will try to answer all your questions to the best of our ability in the coming weeks. So while everybody is typing their questions, we'll take some of the questions that have already come in through the chat. And I see like a few people have requested a scenario planning framework or a template or an example. Suhel and Ravi, we will be, if you can possibly create some sort of a template, if you have any existing risk assessment tool or templates, we will be collating that and we'll be sending to all the participants in the end of the webinar through emails. So I'm going to be skipping that question for now and we'll be moving forward. The first question is from Sivakami, who's asking, what are the guidelines mentioned for corpus usage? Are all of them legal requirements? And Suhel or Suhel or Ravi, you can actually answer any of this question.
Ravi, would you like to take that since you brought it up in your presentation, and I can supplement that?
Let me know if I need to repeat the question for you.
I think you first need to unmute Ravi. He's trying to answer, but he's still on mute.
Yeah, sorry, Vanita, can you repeat that question on corpus again, please?
Yes. What are the guidelines mentioned for corpus usage? Are all of them legal requirements?
So there are no guidelines which have specifically been given for usage of corpus by law. These have all been created based on previous sort of, times when things have happened and litigations that have ruled, or courts which have given certain rules of how you can do it. So those guidelines that we spoke about, which were already shared with you, are like have a board resolution, ensure that the funds are more than 7 years old, ensure that you go back to the funders and get like a written approval from them that you can actually use these funds. All of this should actually help you more or less be able to do this right. Suhel, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Just one more addition with the very recent change in the Finance Act 2020. If you're making a grant from one NGO to the corpus of another NGO, that will not be treated as an approved spend or an approved expense. So I think what NGOs need to be aware of as well, and this is possibly more for the more mature or the larger organizations, is how you're utilizing your own corpus, and also are you making a corpus donation to another smaller NGO. So those tax implications have changed from the 1st of April, and that's something you need to be aware of as well.
Right. So in this case, I think it is more about, it's possible corpus to corpus, but not from your reserves to corpus. Right.
Absolutely. You're right. I just wanted to flag this off for the for the larger and the more mature NGO partners we might have on the participants.
Yeah.
Great.
Vanita, next question.
Yeah, we'll move on to the next question. So Suhel and Ravi, sorry. You again, like this is a question that has been posed by the audience since yesterday. But what, according to you think right now the COVID crisis will last for how long? Do you think there will be any bumps in the recovery process?
Suhel, I will let you take that first.
So unfortunately, I will have to be as realistic and unfortunately also sound pessimistic. But from the best of my understanding and whatever research that my office could do and my team could put together, we don't foresee anything bouncing back in a period less than 9 months to 12 months as a bare minimum. So our advice to all our clients, as well as to any person we're talking to, is that be prepared for the long run. Imagine this as the worst case or the doomsday scenario, and that's how your for-profit or non-profit businesses need to plan towards.
Yes, I would agree to what Suhel is saying, and because there is still so much uncertainty around so many things and how they will pan out, like even the next 15 days or after that is not sure. So it's very difficult to sort of say right now whether and how this will bounce back. But one thing on the positive side is that because this is not a systemic or a bubble burst kind of a situation, where the markets are crashing because of fundamental issues, it is possible once we remove this external threat, the market recovery is likely to be faster than otherwise. So that's the positive side. But yes, again, on how long, I would stick to what Suhel is saying.
The next question is, can we divert the donations which are marked as general donations to specific and urgent purposes like nutrition, health? Again, like to make it more general for the participants, do you think the funds could be transferred from one purpose to another? And what would be the process like for the organizations?
I think the utilization of general grants is pretty straightforward. If the donor has given you any money which is not marked for any purpose, then the NGO is at full liberty to utilize it for any purposes that they deem appropriate, as long as they are within the ambit of their objects for which they've been created. So you need to just go back to your charter documents, which might be your trust deed, your memorandum and articles of association, etc., and also what kind of trust or entity has been registered with the tax authorities. As long as they are following within those guidelines and objects, then utilization of general grants for any purposes is not something that we would need for you to worry about. In fact, it's the other way around, that if there are any grants which have been allocated to specific projects or specific purposes, to utilize them for general, you would need to go back to the donor and seek appropriate permissions and pass necessary adjustment entries in your books of accounts, as well as in the tax disclosures, how you're going to be treating it. So general to specific purposes is not a problem, but specific to general purposes is what would require some precautionary steps to be taken.
Yeah, I think we can move to the next question, Ravi.
Are NGOs allowed to create a designated emergency fund? Can you share some more details on emergency funds?
So again, the emergency fund as a nomenclature is not something that we would reflect in the same way in your books of accounts. How it would be created is that you set aside certain amounts of money, and both the tax statutes and the regular statutes do allow for you to accumulate money for future spending. So it could be something which is up to 15% of your total grants. That's by automatic approval. While if you need any money to be designated for more than 15% of your total incoming grants, there are some statutory obligations of filing certain forms with the tax authorities saying that you're accumulating this for specific purposes and you will utilize that in the next 5 years. So those would be the technical guidelines, but the operational guidelines is something we already covered in our presentation earlier.
Yeah.
Great. Is the aggregation model an option? NGOs trust pooling their essential Q2 and Q3 funding requirements through one collective body, rather than being left to fend for themselves and splintering available CSR funds?
Yes, it is definitely an option. What organizations can do and what is already happening, you will see a lot of implementation agencies or projects which require multiple organizations to fit in different parts of what the programs are. Some may have the technical know-how, some may have the field reach. The organizations coming together to put in different pieces is not very uncommon. You see them happen so often when it's like a grassroots field implementation. A bigger body who has access to the funds takes the funds, engages smaller organizations on the ground to be able to do this. In a similar manner, you can create probably a memorandum of understanding or an agreement between organizations, putting together what each one's roles are, how much funding each one of them is putting in, what will be the outlines and the outcomes of all of these, and it is definitely possible to do this.
We'll move on to the next question, and this one is for Suhel. Recently, NGOs have received a letter from FCRA on COVID-19 response. Any guidelines on how to respond to this FCRA letter?
I think you need to unmute him.
Sorry, I think you can hear me now. What I was responding is that at this point of time, it's hard to give any response or any feedback because that's entirely a fact-specific query and depends on what kind of communication the partner would have received. From our understanding, this is probably more a generic sort of a response, which means that like the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, all partners have been requested to confirm that they are abiding by the COVID-19 guidelines issued by the state and the central governments. So typically this is more of a generic letter and responses need to be appropriately given. But if this is something specific, then I guess that's an offline conversation we need to take up.
Yeah, so I think I've seen a couple of these letters. This is in general asking the organizations to sort of say what areas are they doing any COVID effect, sort of COVID relief services in, and what is their estimate of the money that they're putting in. It is probably to call for information to ensure they can map out which organizations are working where, so that there is no overlap in the government as well as other organizations' relief operations. Otherwise, it's possible the same area might be getting sort of relief again and again from different organizations where that money can actually be put to use in another space.
And thank you for taking it up, Ravi.
Yeah.
Thank you for answering that. The next question is again regarding the emergency funds. So when budgeting during the future proposals, funders or organizations should they put at least 10 to 15% for crisis or emergency situations?
So I think the way to look at it is, no organization is going to really agree to give you that percentage every time you ask for money. If you look at it from a very long-term perspective, you need to create a snowball effect. Start investing that money, start making that money work for you, and slowly create a sizable fund. If you were to even look at creating just 1 month's inflow as an emergency, it's roughly about 8% of the money that you need to create 1 month's inflow. This could be created by just keeping aside 6% of all your income for say a year, and you would have 1 month's income available for yourself to use in the next year. You could slowly keep building. So I would say 5 to 7% is a good ask. How you anyways look for contingencies between 2 to 5% when you are pitching for proposals. That's a good structure to follow. Use that contingency money to actually set aside and not use it for programs saying we forgot to budget for something.
Thank you so much, Ravi, for answering that. We are, in the interest of time, we are taking one last question. That's from Vanessa. She is asking, for scenario planning, we need to have a good sense of our income flow. However, our CSR donors' own plans are also very fluid and they may not be able to commit to funding. Should we therefore use probabilities like weightage to income flows?
I think that's the right approach. While you do underplay the money that is already promised to you, also try and add to it, like we spoke about, different ways or different means through which you can get more money in. Could be, like I said, collaborating with other organizations to do more projects. Could be, revenue generating activities which are permitted to a certain extent by law. within the ambit of your deed. It could also be, sort of, yeah, I mean, these are all measures that I can think of. So,
No, so in addition to that, I think what is very essential is to remain, to have the lines of communication remain open. So the more you're engaging with your donors, more you're engaging with your ecosystem, that's where you'd be aware of what is the probability of money coming in. Because pure statistical scenarios of sampling or sort of projection might not work in these unprecedented times. So purely going by those will not always get you the right result. So remaining engaged, being aware of what's happening, being rather participating in forums like what Atma is doing right now will give a general feeler to how the ecosystem is responding. And also there might be a difference in terms of response in the beginning of this crisis, in the phase we're in right now, versus let's imagine in about August to September, and versus when it matures or when things are more stable towards Q1 of next year. So it's all a factor of making sure that we are not making extremely long-term plans either. We need to live in the moment. We need to be sure that we are sustaining this quarter and thereafter moving to the next quarter. And therefore, short-term and medium-term planning becomes more essential than long-term planning because the variables are too many for now.
Thank you so much, Ravi and Suhel, for answering all that questions. I think in the interest of time, we are taking that was the last question. And if you have any other questions that have remained unanswered, please note them down and do send it to us through the feedback forms that we will be circulating post the conference. Ravi and Suhel have agreed to answer a few questions post the conference as well. So thank you so much. It was lovely engaging in this session. I will hand over the mic to Sneha for the next round of instructions.
Thanks, Vanita. And once again, just to echo that, thank you, Suhel and Ravi, for a very insightful session. I just want to take a minute to summarize what to me were some of the key takeaways from your session. How, Suhel, you sort of started out by giving us a broader economic perspective for India as a whole, and the fact that a lot of experts, including Deloitte, Fitch, are looking at a likely GDP growth rate of possibly less than 3%. I think that's indicative of a slowdown that we are likely to see in this year for sure. You also spoke about declining wealth for foundations and a drop in the events for the purpose of fundraising, which are all going to have a combined effect of creating a sort of liquidity crunch for nonprofits, and that's something that we should all be ready for. I like how you started by sharing these ingredients that you need to kind of deal with this crisis. You need to start with a team that's equipped to do this kind of financial planning. You need to have some tools which help you assess where you are as an organization. A contingency plan, which includes a sort of scenario analysis on your cash flows for the future. And all of this together really points us in the direction of the key message there, which is that there are a lot of steps that we need to take now, right? I don't think we have a lot of time to wait and see how this unfolds, because it's all sort of happening. And so it's important that, we take these two key steps you mentioned. One was around the income enhancement, as well as the other on the cost optimization front, and start looking at our own organizations and how we can implement those measures, right? You also mentioned two other sort of activities that organizations could explore. One was dipping into corpus funds within the legality of that, and also potentially raising loans if that is an option, with different ways in which collaterals could be provided. Lastly, we went into future proofing, where Suhel basically shared two key perspectives. One was around creating an emergency fund that will allow you to kind of dip into it when the going gets tough. And the second was to look at a crisis management policy, which can sort of provide you the guidelines that you need on how and when you can sort of use these emergency funds, right? I just want to close the session, by sharing the question that was asked in the poll initially, and then we had someone from the participant also ask this, which is, how long do we think this crisis will last? And for me, I think that was another key takeaway from this session, where we're not thinking about this as a short-term phenomena. I think all of us agree that there are two parts to this crisis. One is the healthcare and the humanitarian part, and the other is the economic part. And I think somewhere both of them merge into creating expected timeline for us to recover. And so nothing less than 9 to 12 months until things start to seemingly look like what they were pre-COVID. And so, yeah, those were some of the key takeaways for me from this session. Thanks, Ravi and Suhel, for the insight.